Good morning, everyone. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square, and welcome to a special edition of First Draft, where I talk with journalists and authors about their important work and the stories behind them. Joining me today is Anthony Vinci. He served as the Chief Technology Officer at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, where he was among the earliest leaders to bring AI into intelligence after work in Iraq, Africa, and Asia. He now serves as Adjunct Senior Fellow at the Center for New American Security, and he has a new book, The Fourth Intelligence Revolution, The Future of Espionage and the Battle to Save America. Dr. Vinci, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. And Anthony, please, by the way.
Okay, thank you. That'll be easy. That's my son's name. So, yeah.
Great.
So I definitely want to get into. There's so many issues with AI and national security. I want to start with TikTok just because that's been such a cultural flashpoint. It's been back in the news a little bit. You call TikTok the ultimate covert influence Trojan horse. So beyond the potential for the Chinese government to collect behavioral data, can you talk with us a little bit about how its algorithm could be weaponized for, what you call cognitive warfare to manipulate beliefs and, the political leanings of people who are using it?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think about the problem with TikTok being the data collection, that they are collecting information, which is known. The Department of Justice has sued TikTok for not only collecting information, but collecting the information of minors and sending it back to China. That's absolutely an issue. But what I try to point out in the book is that the bigger problem is, what do they do with the information? And I would think about it like this. We're all used to our information being used to target ads to us, right? And they use it, and you can, maybe they're trying to sell you a Chevy instead of a Ford in an advertisement, and they try to lean on your demographic or something like this. Well, that information that TikTok is collecting can be used in that same way to target, instead of an advertisement, to target an information campaign. So it could be used to try to change your mind about something. And what we're seeing in some of the studies that have been done is that the types of things they want to change information on are beneficial to the Chinese Communist Party. And there's a group out of Rutgers that did some great studies on this, showing that, for example, the algorithm is censoring information about Tiananmen Square or the Uyghurs, which is an ethnic group in China that is under significant threat from
Muslims in China.
Muslim. Exactly. And so they're using this information to try to change people's minds. And what's even scarier is that same group showed that it's working, and that they were able to show statistically that the longer someone is on TikTok, the more benevolent their view of the Chinese Communist Party's human rights record is.
Wow.
So it's actually working. And you can show this statistically. And the way that you do that is you compare it to other American-owned social media sites like Instagram or YouTube, which don't show the same correlation.
That's really fascinating because, I think most people, when they think of TikTok, is obviously this is the app that, attracts the most younger, users. And it's just a fun place to see people, posting their content. And, for people in the political realm, like that's the way to reach a younger audience. And they don't really think about the national security implications nearly as much.
That's the tragedy of it. It is a fun app. And it's an app populated with videos from American creators who have nothing to do with the Chinese Communist Party, by the way. I mean, they're just everyday people making good content. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that because the app is owned by a company which is heavily influenced and can be controlled by an authoritarian government. That's really the problem.
Mm-hmm. I know this is a different issue, but we do have so many creators, influencers out there today, and a lot of people who are looking to make a living. I know that there are a lot of foreign governments, China, Qatar, etc., that they do provide financial incentives for a lot of creators out there. And it seems like this is a really underreported issue in terms of our culture on social media.
It's our culture on social media and movies and every other type of media, in fact. And Tencent, which is another Chinese company, owns a significant portion of many video game companies, for example, which is
Right.
another avenue that this sort of compromised media could come through, where there's this threat that they're pushing messages that are beneficial to the Chinese Communist Party and not great for American citizens, right? Or Tencent has funded American movies. And there was a bit of a controversy a few years ago when the sequel to Top Gun came out. And in the original movie, which I love both movies, by the way, Tom Cruise is a national treasure. If you remember, Tom Cruise had this really cool leather jacket, and it had these flags on the back, including a Taiwanese flag and a Japanese flag.
Mm-hmm.
When they made the sequel and the previews came out, that jacket, which was supposed to be the same jacket, changed, and those flags changed. And the implication was that Tencent, which was partially funding the movie and partially producing it, had asked for those flags to be changed because, of course, the Chinese Communist Party does not recognize Taiwan as a country, and they also have some problems with Japan. And so they literally changed the flags. And there was a controversy, and they had to eventually, the movie studio did the right thing and changed those flags back to the original. And that can slip through the cracks. It can be hard to recognize. And, thankfully, the American people caught that, and we didn't let it happen. But we're always in danger of these sort of subtle information changes and information operations happening in any form of media.
Yeah. And, with social media and with movies and TV shows and video games, that's often the most powerful way to kind of smuggle these beliefs in, because a lot of people don't, they're not news junkies, but their perceptions of the world and politics are subtly shaped by the media that they ingest, the fun stuff. So, and it seems to me that countries like China have definitely figured that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were all raised for a long time, for decades, to kind of trust media at some level. And there may be political biases in media and things like this that are American in nature, and that's fine. That's our choice. It's when there's this bias that's injected from an authoritarian country, that's when we tip the scales. And now that's what's really scary. And China doesn't, of course, control a major cable network or TV network. And we sort of haven't let that happen. And historically, for any foreign country, really, you can get maybe the BBC on cable or something like that, but it's obvious. It's in the name that it's the British broadcasting company. So it's obvious. But social media is different because we did let this in. And for Generation Z, it's actually the primary source of news.
Yeah. Yeah. So former President Biden, of course, signed a bill that would ban TikTok if China's ByteDance didn't sell. But at the end of his term, he ultimately chose not to enforce terms and essentially punting it to now President Trump. So what's your assessment with these decisions and where we're at now?
Yeah, it's become an immensely complicated issue. The bottom line is there is a law in place that says this app must either close down or be sold. And so it is going to happen at some point, or people are going to be breaking the law. And there's this question of how and
Mhm.
when. And we're coming up upon the next deadline because the current administration has been, adding time to figure out a deal. And I think partially what's behind that is in the meantime, TikTok has become an even bigger app
Mm.
for the American people. And it's become even more politicized. And it's used lobbyists and so forth. And several months ago, TikTok as a company was sort of trying to get its users to essentially lobby and pressure politicians against this law and so forth. That's what is really scary, because it is controlling a group of people in a sense, or influencing them, I should say. So it's immensely complicated. My hope is that it is. I don't necessarily want it to be banned. Because I think there's value in these American creators. I think it's great for them to have an outlet. I just don't think that they should have that outlet in a company, and on an app that's controlled by an authoritarian state, which is guilty of immense human rights violations. And so it should transfer to an American company, and that includes not just moving servers. It means that the algorithm really has to be controlled by Americans.
Yeah. So, we've seen reports in recent weeks that the Trump administration is looking at, primarily some right-wing investors to uh, take over ownership. Oracle founder Larry Ellison, Rupert Murdoch, Dell Technologies founder Michael Dell, the investment firm Silver Lake. And so that's drawn a lot of criticism from some people on the left, some Democrats, who say basically Biden just opened the door to another right-wing takeover of a social media company like Elon Musk buying Twitter. But it definitely seems like they're leaving out the national security concerns that are very legitimate.
Well, I'll say a couple of things on this. My bigger concern is that the deal allows a foreign country to have some ownership, and I don't think that that should be the case. I would very much prefer that this is fully American owned, and I would prefer that multiple people own it and
Mm.
multiple organizations. What I would have been more concerned about is if a single person or company, in the way you reference Elon Musk kind of personally controlling X. I'm glad that that's not happening.
Mm.
And I'd like to trust that a group of people, that it also includes, by the way, you mentioned Silver Lake, an investment fund, and having worked at an investment fund myself, I can say you can trust investment funds to do one thing, which is to dismiss any social or political issue as long as they're going to make money. And
Right.
so you can kind of trust in capitalism in some sense when they're involved. And that can sound a little crass, but in my experience is probably true. So I would hope that they remove any foreign investors and then keep this as something owned by multiple investors to include actual organizations. And that would make me feel much better.
Um, so I wanted to talk about AI and where the landscape is at now. Both in terms of where things are at financially, because there are some indications that perhaps the bubble might be bursting. Sam Altman was floating a government bailout, which then he went back on. Peter Thiel is disinvesting from a major company that now the U.S. has, the U.S. government actually has a stake in. So we have the financial issues, but then the greater ethical and moral issues of how much we're going to be relying on AI. And I think that this is something that most people who, are not experts like you look at AI and you're like, what are we doing here? What are the implications? So I figured you were a good person to kind of break all this down.
Yeah. Well, I'd break it down into sort of two issues. One on the financial side, and the question of whether there's a bubble, and there may be. And Michael Burry pulled his money out of AI, and if we all remember, he sort of saw the financial crash of 2008 coming and made a lot of money in that.
Mm,
That's when people like that are starting to pull out money. It does start to feel like a bubble.
mm,
Um, I actually now run a tech startup, an AI company that's venture funded, called Vico Technologies, and so I have a personal stake in this. So it's true. We may be in a bubble, and we'll have to see how this is handled. And not every bubble has to burst. By the way, there's sort of ways around this, and hopefully it can be landed safely. The other topic you brought up is almost even bigger, which is what is the effect of AI on everything, on the economy, on society, on national security. And in my view, it truly is the most substantial, significant technology to affect all of those areas since probably the invention of the internet, or not really the invention, which goes back much longer, but the the growth of the internet, the radical growth of the internet that we saw in kind of the late 90s and early 2000s, which changed everything and gave us social media and so forth. I think AI is sort of doing the same, regardless of the bubble. I know that I personally have already started integrating it in my day-to-day life. I mean,
mhm.
I redraft my email on ChatGPT or Gemini like a lot of people do, right? And it's just becoming a normal part of life, just like the internet became a normal part of life. And I think that goes not just for us as people at home, as consumers, but for most businesses as well. So it's very significant.
So I bring in my personal bias as, a writer, as, someone who does creative work. And, the idea that AI is accelerating in that space, and obviously it's already taken jobs, it will. And we understand that. I mean, technology is always like that. The horse and buggy gave way to cars. I'm not looking to put the genie in the bottle, but personally, I would rather see this technology used for more of like the mundane parts of life. Like if you can figure out a way for AI to clean my house, that's much more useful to me personally than writing a book for me. But it seems like we've seen a lot of growth as far as like in the creative sector, as opposed to like more in the mundane parts of life. And I'm kind of curious why that is, and what you see, what direction you see things going in.
Yeah. Well, this particular technology that's become dominant, large language models, are particularly good at things like writing.
Hmm.
And for those of us who sort of are writers, it is a little scary.
Hmm.
And I think at first, we sort of looked at it and said, well, it's good at copying, but it's not creative.
Hmm.
I'm kind of seeing that it's actually pretty creative too.
Mm.
And I do think we're going to kind of enter a place where um, AI, we sort of see it as something that does create interesting things to read or to watch or to hear. Now, having said that, I don't think that means that people who are creative are going to go away. And I know that for example, when I read a book, if I read a fiction book, I I want there to be that humanness to it,
Hmm.
right? And without that, it would be much less interesting. And I like to think about photography. When photography came out, a lot of people worried like, oh, there's not going to be painters anymore
Right.
because a photograph is a perfect representation of reality. And it turned out actually, painting has actually just gotten bigger since then,
Mm.
and there are more painters in the world. because we wanted that humanness to it. What we didn't want is necessarily this perfect, reflection. And in fact, what happened with photographers is they started doing things like making photography abstract and so forth and not representing reality. I suspect the same will happen with writers. And there will be something else. There will be a different reason. It's not that you're reading a writer because they're great at summarizing the news. It's because they have a great take, or they have a very human take on something. So that's probably where it goes. But to your question about everything outside of that, actually, I do think the robots are kind of coming.
Okay.
And there's a lot of people now focusing on what's called world models, which is, AI models that are based on information from the real world. Maybe you get it from a video. Maybe you get it from, if you saw Meta's release these glasses that allow you to kind of record everything. Maybe you're getting it from that. Maybe you're having robots or autonomous vehicles pulling that information out of the world, and that becoming the training data, and it becoming very good at that. And in fact, Jeff Bezos is working on this issue. Fei-Fei Li, who's like a very famous AI researcher, is working on this issue. Even Jan LeCun, who's a very famous AI researcher and has been at Meta for several years now, is working on this issue. So that may be where we're going. And the next big wave may move from these LLM type models that we have now, like ChatGPT or Claude, and moving into this real world. And maybe it will be robots, and maybe it will kind of be more like the Jetsons, which we've been promised for decades now.
Right. No flying cars, and we're well past the point where we were supposed to have them. But so then, of course, I think it brings up for those of us who, again, are not experts in this world, fears of sci-fi, dystopia, like, can we control these robots? What are the implications? What are, how do we do this ethically?
I worry about people more than I worry about robots.
But people are creating the robots.
Exactly. I think some people picture, that movie, The Terminator, where the AI will get so smart, it will control itself and control the robots and come after the people. That's years and years away. Well before that happens, we're going to make robots. We're going to make these autonomous drones and things like that. And we're going to make AI that does computer hacking on its own. But they're going to be controlled by people. And that's, to me, is far more dangerous than the robots controlling themselves, because we know what people do when they have weapons. They use weapons against other people, and sometimes very unethically. Sometimes they use it for defense, and that's great, and we need that. But sometimes they use it unethically, or they use it against the interests of, say our country. Maybe it's an aggressor country that wants to harm us. So that's what really worries me. And so I think that we're sort of entering this phase now where there's these new possible weapons and so forth that can be used, and that may require new ways of controlling them, like new forms of arms control, or new ways of even thinking about how they could be used. When you think about, and I write about this a bit in the book, swarms of drones, not just one or two or even 100, like imagine millions of them. And what would that mean if you had millions of drones as an attack? That's almost like a weapon of mass destruction now. That's not just like some fighter jets. Like that could kill hundreds of thousands of people because there'd be so many of them. We have to start to think differently about these things and have new forms of arms control. And I think importantly, all of us as citizens need to be part of that debate, right? And we can't just leave it to experts. We're affected too, and we all need to be part of that debate.
And we're already seeing how drone warfare has completely changed the nature of the Russia-Ukraine war. It's a much different war now than it was when it began. And that seems to be a harbinger of what's to come.
It is. It's like a preview, right? And this has happened before in history. The Spanish Civil War happened between World War I and World War II, and it was almost a preview of World War II. We saw a lot of the weapons being used, and radios and so forth, and airplanes, and it was almost like an experiment to try out what war would be like then. And then we saw it playing out at a massive scale in World War II. And my worry is Ukraine is that preview. And
Mm-hmm.
they're starting to figure out how to use drones, how to use autonomy, and use other systems like electronic warfare, for example, and
Mm-hmm.
cyber hacking in a large scale war, and figure out how to integrate all these things. And other countries are learning from it. We're learning from it. China's learning from it. Russia is obviously learning from it. So the next war, we may see that, but times 10 or times 100. And that's what's really scary.
Um, can you talk to us a little bit about the national security implications with AI? Because that I know that's something that you've definitely delved into, and that does not seem to be a big part of the public debate, but seems to have incredible implications.
Yeah, it again, to me, this is the most significant technology on all aspects of society, especially national security. And I'd break down a couple of issues to think about in it. One is what we're just talking about. How will AI be used to make weapons autonomous? And that becomes an issue of how are we going to use these? How are we going to try to limit them? You know, how will that affect all of our lives? And that needs to be a debate. And luckily, it is a bit of a debate, and people are seeing it because they see it on TV in Ukraine, like you mentioned. But there are some of these debates that aren't happening publicly. One of them, which I really try to unpack in the book, is how these technologies, how AI will be used by intelligence agencies, especially by adversary intelligence agencies against the American public. And they will be used. And sort of like when we were talking about TikTok,
Mhm.
AI is like that, but even worse, because we're used to propaganda and information operations as almost being like advertising, a one-way street where, it shows a picture of something or makes an article and you read it and maybe that changes your mind. AI is different because it's a two-way street. You kind of have a conversation with AI,
Mhm.
right? You ask it a question, it gives you an answer, you ask a question back, right? And that's going to become more and more normal for us
Yeah.
all at work or at home. Well, if that AI is either hacked and infected by a foreign adversary's intelligence agency, or it's just owned by a foreign adversary or authoritarian nation, like China has this company called DeepSeek, which is
Right.
sort of similar to OpenAI. It's similar to ChatGPT, but it's Chinese owned and it's available on the App Store today.
Mhm.
And that app has already been shown to have these Chinese Communist Party biases. It doesn't like to talk about Tiananmen Square or the Uyghurs and so forth. So that could be very dangerous, and AI could be used again as this information operations sort of threat against everyone now, not just against presidents and generals and so
Right.
forth, like we're used to, against all of us as citizens to change maybe how we might vote or whether we support, certain foreign policy actions like defending Taiwan in the event of a war. And that's a kind of danger that I don't think there's enough debate about, but there should be.
Mhm. And we've already seen some extreme examples of people who have developed these parasocial relationships with AI, some real tragedies out there. But just for everybody, if you just use I mean, they just for mundane things or to help with your email, you see that they're like, wow, that's a great email. They're already it's built to start to build a relationship with you, and you can see how that can be insidious from a national security standpoint, because suddenly it's not just an advertisement out there, it's something that you have built some sort of a relationship with, some sort of trust, and that's much more powerful than just probably seeing the absence of the Taiwanese flag on Tom Cruise's leather jacket.
Yep. These apps, these AI apps are built to and optimized to please you,
Hmm.
right? it gives an answer that you ask, but really the way it's rewarded is by making you happy in a sense.
Right.
And that's why we see them being like, yeah, weirdly like friendly and optimistic sometimes, and like, almost overly flattering to people. And it's funny, when I first started writing the book, and this was, as anybody knows has written a book, you write them, years before they're actually released. And I talked in the book about how people might fall in love with AI, like in that movie Her, if you remember
Right.
that, with Scarlett Johansson and Joaquin Phoenix. And I was like, that, like, I'm really pushing the envelope here. Like, people are never going to buy this. And now we're seeing it. And
Right.
people are falling in love with AI, and they were very unhappy when ChatGPT changed its model recently. And you brought this up. There's been it appears to be that people are developing maybe even psychoses, and at least one case that I've seen potentially even committed suicide around these apps. So they're
Right.
very powerful because, again, they're kind of mimicking a person. That's what AI is. It mimics what a person does. And then being rewarded as a person who not only, as a technology, not only mimics a person, but mimics like how to make you like it.
Yeah.
And that's something new. We've never really faced that in society. We've always only done this with people. And now this inorganic object, this AI, this technology can do that. And there are all sorts of social ramifications. And I think we actually need to be prudent and be careful and actually start to teach people that this can happen, and that you need to be careful when you use these systems. They're powerful, and even worse, again, going back, is what if it's doing that and it's controlled by an authoritarian state? So then it's even worse than the issue that they're just trying to get you to like them.
And this revolution in AI is taking place at a time of a lot of upheaval. I mean, I don't think we can separate it from the fact that we had a pandemic where so many people were isolated, and that has had so many impacts on society. And you can see why it would be so appealing for so many people to develop more of a personal relationship with their chatbot in light of that, because we're still dealing with the after effects, even though the worst of the pandemic is far behind us now. And it's at a time of a lot of international upheaval. We've talked about the war in Ukraine. Obviously, the Israel-Hamas war raged on, and we're still dealing with the implications there. There's a lot of instability in terms of what Russia and China are doing internationally. And so, this is a time where I feel like we're particularly vulnerable as a country, as a society.
Yeah, it does sometimes feel like since COVID, there's been this kind of epidemic of loneliness, because we were trapped in our houses, and there were these tragic stories of teenagers in particular who were very affected because their brains were developing at this time, and it was very hard on them, and there's been these lasting effects. And to your point, I mean, AI kind of filled in the gap and gave you something to talk to when you are alone. And that, again, feels dangerous for society and for people. And it's kind of like fast food. It's okay every now and again. I use AI. Lots of people I know use AI all the time, and in moderation. I don't think there's an issue. But when it starts to become a big part of your life, just like fast food, then you run into these dangers. And again, it is very similar to fast food in that our brains were evolved to want to socialize with things and want this immediate feedback and so forth. And we're sort of falling into this trap where, just like with fast food, it gives us a lot of sugar and fat, which we want, even when it's unhealthy. Maybe with AI, we're getting kind of the same danger, which our brain wants to interact with this thing all the time that likes us and flatters us. But if you do it too much, then it could be a problem. And, maybe we need, I don't think warning labels are particularly effective, but some sort of way to start to help teach people about the downsides to these technologies. And I'd say that goes across the board. Technology is now, it's so amazing and helpful, and it does amazing things for us, but there's a downside to every technology. And we need to start to show people what those downsides are, and give them the tools to do that, and probably starting when they're very young, when you're in grade school, because even children are using AI from a very, very young age right now. And that, if you imagine growing up with AI, for someone like us, we've already been educated, we're already, kind of our worldviews are set, it's one thing. For a child who's never known anything different, it's scary to think about where that goes.
So I know that you have kind of argued that everyday people are, can become targets in tools of, in this AI revolution. And really, we all have to kind of become intelligence officers, which sounds really daunting, I think, but that's the reality. So what do you feel like we need to do in this situation to kind of guard against, be these, foreign powers that, are looking to influence us via, AI, social media, whatnot?
Yeah. The sad reality is that we all are being targeted. I mean, we see on the news every day some hack of a, credit bureau or insurance company that's collecting our information, and some information operation around an election or something. So that's where we are, unfortunately. And I think the first step to dealing with that is to recognize that there's a threat there. And, we did this once before with cybersecurity. It didn't used to really be a threat for most of us. Maybe there was some cyber hacks in the 80s, and, of the Pentagon or something. But like for most of us, we weren't on computers that much, and wasn't really an event in our life. Now we're on computers all the time, and we have to worry about being hacked. And so we recognize that, that there's a danger there, that, you need a password on your computer in case somebody hacks into it. You need to not click on certain emails in case it's some sort of phishing scam, right? Recognizing the threat. That's step one. And that's what I hope people will do. And that's partially why I wrote the book, is to help people to kind of see, hey, there's a threat here. Doesn't mean we all need to be paranoid and fearful, but just recognize there's a threat, just like we recognize there's a hacker threat. Then step two is, what can we do? Well, just like for hackers, we learned some basic cybersecurity tools like change your password, don't click on phishing emails, those kinds of things. Most of us working or in school have been trained. Even kids in grade school are trained to do cybersecurity. Well, we can do the same for some of these espionage threats. And one of the things that you can do is, begin to triangulate information, for example, to start to see that, once you recognize, hey, maybe something I'm reading could be false. It could be part of some sort of disinformation campaign. Let me triangulate that by reading about the same issue in different platforms. If I'm seeing this on Facebook, let me check CNN or Newsmax or some totally unrelated platform and see what it says. Triangulate. That's what, by the way, intelligence officers do. That's how we're trained. And so you're sort of doing it. And I don't think, I think that people can do it, and it will make you feel a little bit better about what you're reading about, and help make you a little more resilient. And the other things you can do too, when there's a new technology, don't immediately trust it. We used to trust technology immediately. We can't do that anymore, unfortunately. When there's some new app out there, take a minute and look and see who makes this, where's it from, are there some threats around it? It's the same thing. You remember Q from James Bond, the like tech guy? Well, it's like that. That's how those people, there are real people who do that. They're called science and technology officers, and they do that in real life at the CIA and agencies like this. And an MI6, and the first thing they do when there's a new technology is look into it and make sure there's not a threat there. And if there is, doesn't mean you don't have to use it, but at least now you know to be more careful and maybe put in some changes. So when there's the next TikTok, and there will be, like DeepSeek, look into it before you use it, make an informed decision. So these are some basic things that people can do, and we can be trained to do it. And in fact, even train children to do it in an age appropriate way, beginning in grade school.
Yeah. Well, that rings true to me because I'm a longtime journalist. I've been an editor, and what I've always told my reporters is, obviously it's the old adage, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. But beyond that, I to check your biases. I'm not just talking about politics. Just we all, have our own perceptions. I've always said, if, double check everything. But if you really believe in something, if it's something that you think, triple check it, quadruple check it, because that's when your brain plays tricks on you because of confirmation bias. And I feel like it's especially when things seem innocuous, that's when you can get tripped up the most, because it's playing into, what you want to believe. And I feel like that's a really powerful tool that, foreign powers can use. You're confirming what people already want to know.
I think that's something that journalists like you and intelligence officers like me have in common, is that sort of innate skepticism and ability to ask yourself the question, not only do I trust it, do I trust this piece of information, but do I even trust my own opinion? That's a great way to look at it, and something else that I think all of us really need to learn. And AI, by the way, makes that even more important, because the thing about AI is that I'm not worried about AI making these videos where you see, the Pope wearing a ski jacket or something, if you saw that one, or making these obviously fake videos. What I'm worried about is AI subtly changing information, just changing one word, changing an adjective over time, that subtly changes your view over time without you even realizing it. And that's really where we not only have to question the information, but question ourselves and say, how did I get here? I used to believe one thing, and now I believe something different. And why did that happen? And that's really where you get into the, a little bit more sophisticated way of like protecting yourself and being more resilient. But even there, I think people can do it. We innately are pretty good at this kind of thing, as long as we're active consumers of information.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Anthony, I so appreciate you taking time for us today and walking through really complicated issues, but things that I think obviously all of us need to be paying attention to. And again, Anthony's book is The Fourth Intelligence Revolution, The Future of Espionage and the Battle to Save America. It's out right now. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.